Okay, let's dive in. We've got this fascinating material you sent over, looking at some of the absolute weirdest laws still around in the U.S.
Yeah, and this deep dive, it isn't just like listing funny laws.
Yeah.
We're really trying to see it as a window
A window into what exactly?
into America's legal history, its culture, all through this, very peculiar lens.
Gotcha. So these laws, they might seem like just relics, right? Funny bits of trivia.
Exactly. But they actually give us some surprising insights. They're like little snapshots of past social norms, maybe specific anxieties people had.
Or just how lawmakers reacted to stuff back then.
Right. That's the mission today, basically. Uncover where these odd rules came from and, what they really tell us about the places and the times they were created.
It's like digging up legal fossils, almost. Okay, so where do we start this tour? Maybe with laws about public behavior, decorum.
That's a great place to start. And Alabama gives us a perfect example. It's technically illegal there to wear a fake mustache in church if it causes laughter and disrupts the service.
Wait, really? A fake mustache? That's incredibly specific.
It is, isn't it? But you got to look at the context the source gives us. This was statewide, and it really points to how central the church was in, like, the early 20th century South.
Okay, so church wasn't just church, it was a big community thing.
A huge community gathering.
Hmm.
And keeping things orderly, decorum, was super important for the social fabric.
So the mustache law was part of trying to keep things proper, solemn.
Precisely. It was grouped with other rules aimed at preserving solemnity during worship, the fake mustache detail, and especially focusing on the laughter it causes. It seems funny now.
Yeah, legislating laughter seems a bit much.
It does, but it shows how serious they were about preventing even minor disruptions. It wasn't really about the mustache, more about stopping perceived disrespect in that setting.
Huh. Do they? I mean, does anyone actually enforce this anymore?
No. The sources say there's no record of recent enforcement. It's basically just a local joke now, a funny thing still on the books. But it tells you how seriously they took decorum back then.
Wow. Okay, so some laws come from general ideas of order, but others seem like they must have come from one specific crazy incident, right?
Oh, definitely. Which leads us perfectly to Arizona. And that famous one about not letting a donkey sleep in a bathtub after 7 p.m.
Ah, yes. The donkey in the bathtub. That one always pops up. It just screams, there has to be a story here.
And there is. The origin story is apparently key. It comes from Kingman, Arizona, back in the 1920s.
Okay.
So this local merchant had a donkey. And for whatever reason, the donkey apparently liked sleeping in an old bathtub he kept outside.
As donkeys do, apparently.
Right. Well, then there was a flash flood.
Right.
And the story goes the bathtub with the donkey in it got swept down the flooded street.
No way.
Yeah. It supposedly caused this whole big rescue operation, tied up town resources, caused a huge fuss.
So the law was a direct result of one donkey's unfortunate float trip.
That's the story. They passed the law to prevent that specific, bizarre scenario from happening again. The incredible specificity, the animal, the furniture, the time limit. That's why it's such a classic piece of trivia.
A single weird event creating a law that lasts around a century?
Pretty much. It's totally obsolete now, obviously, never enforced. But it really does paint a picture of the kind of unpredictable things rural towns dealt with back then when livestock were just, part of daily life in a way they aren't for most people today.
Speaking of animals and chaos, we need to talk about Alaska. Fairbanks, specifically.
Ah, yes. The rule against giving alcoholic beverages to a moose.
Okay, a drunken moose. Now that sounds like something out of a cartoon, not a law book.
Well, the source material suggests there actually was a notorious incident. A moose. Possibly drunk on fermented berries or fruit that fell from trees.
Or maybe someone actually gave it booze.
Or, possibly given alcohol by people. Reportedly caused some real chaos in town. It wasn't just wandering around peacefully.
So, again, it wasn't just a random, let's make a weird law thing. There was a trigger.
Seems so. It was framed as a response, highlighting the very real danger of mixing large wildlife, like moose, with alcohol. Both for the moose's safety and, public safety. It was meant to prevent future problems based on something that actually happened.
It's just such a strange image to wrap your head around. A town needing a law about drunk moose.
It really is. And now it's kind of a local legend, a bit of a running joke up there. You don't hear about prosecutions, but it's still technically there. It perfectly shows that weird intersection you get in Alaska between wildlife management, public safety, and just, the wildness of the place.
These animal laws keep popping up. Let's shift a bit. Maybe look at laws reflecting changing ideas about animals, like animal welfare.
Oklahoma is a good example here.
Yeah.
They have a law specifically against tripping horses with the intent to injure them.
Tripping horses, that sounds intentionally cruel.
It is. And the law makes sense when you understand the context, which the source provides. It's tied to Oklahoma's rodeo culture. Horse tripping was this practice,
What did it involve?
basically roping the front legs of a running horse to make it fall. And as you can imagine, it often caused really serious injuries, sometimes fatal.
Wow. So this wasn't about a weird one-off incident, but banning a practice people started seeing as inhumane?
Exactly. Public attitudes changed, animal rights movements gained traction, and lawmakers responded by banning that specific cruel practice. And unlike the donkey or the mustache, this one is still enforced.
Really?
Yeah, especially rural areas where rodeos are common. So it's a very real example of laws evolving with our ethics about animals.
That makes sense. It shows how the legal system can respond to changing values.
Definitely. It's focused, but its enforcement shows a clear shift.
Okay, another animal one, but different. Ohio. The ban on selling dyed chickens.
Ah, yes. This one taps into a specific trend from the past, especially around Easter. People used to dye baby chicks bright colors, pink, blue, green.
Oh, yeah. I think I vaguely remember hearing about that, like they sold them on the street.
Sometimes, yeah, or in markets.
Mm.
Novelty pets. But it raised big welfare concerns. The dye could actually harm the chicks, they're so delicate. And, maybe more importantly, most of these chicks were probably abandoned once the holiday fun wore off.
Because who really wants a pet chicken they bought on impulse?
Right, so the law was trying to tackle both the cruelty of the dyeing and also discourage that kind of irresponsible novelty pet ownership.
So lawmakers reacted to a fad, basically.
Pretty much. Trying to curb a fleeting trend with a permanent law. The source says it's rarely enforced now, mostly because the fad itself just died out. But it sits there as proof of that legislative reaction.
Strange how temporary things can leave permanent marks in the law books.
It really is. And very specific, again, just chickens, just dying.
Indiana has one tied to animals too, but it feels more like transportation history. The speed limit for horseback riding.
Yes. 10 miles per hour max on horseback. This one is a fantastic legal time capsule. You have to picture the time. Early automobiles are just starting to appear.
So roads were a mix. Horses, carriages, maybe a sputtering car here and there.
Exactly. It's basically an early speed limit, but for horses, lawmakers were worried about accidents, faster horses mixing with these new cars, plus pedestrians who were used to horse speed. It was a genuine safety concern back then.
Which seems completely quaint now. Horses aren't exactly clogging up the interstates.
Right. It's totally obsolete, rarely if ever enforced. But it stays on the books as this funny reminder of how drastically transportation and our worries about it have changed in like a century, like a classic anachronism.
Okay, shifting gears from animals. What about laws trying to protect consumers, but in really unusual areas?
Massachusetts has entered the chat. They have a law requiring fortune tellers to be certified.
Certified fortune tellers, how? How does that even work? Who certifies them, and for what?
Great questions. The origin, according to the source, was about fraud. Concerns about people claiming to be psychic, charging vulnerable folks a lot of money for, well, questionable predictions or advice.
So it was consumer protection against scams.
That was the idea.
Wow.
Requiring certification, some kind of official status, was hoped to offer protection, maybe ensure some accountability. But yeah, regulating something like fortune telling is tricky.
It seems inherently difficult to, empirically test or certify someone's psychic abilities.
Absolutely. And that's the core strangeness. It highlights this weird intersection of law and belief. Where does the government draw the line between personal face entertainment and actual fraud? How do you even begin to assess qualifications for something like that?
Is it enforced? Are there certified psychics walking around?
Well, it's rarely enforced in terms of ongoing checks, but the source does mention that occasionally unlicensed fortune tellers do get arrested, usually when there are specific allegations of fraud or bilking people out of money. So the law exists, but its weirdness lies in trying to legitimize or regulate a field that kind of resists that whole framework.
Yeah, that one definitely makes you think about where laws can and maybe can't effectively reach. Okay, what about laws that just seem dated, reflecting social standards or economic situations that are long gone?
Maryland's got a good one for changing social norms. The ban on wearing sleeveless shirts in public parks.
Sleeveless shirts in a park. That's like standard summer wear now. Why was that ever illegal?
almost certainly dates back to the early 20th century again. Public decency standards, ideas about modesty in dress were just way stricter.
Okay.
So lawmakers were probably trying to enforce a certain look, a certain standard of public appearance, reflecting the prevailing morality of the time. Sleeveless was maybe seen as too informal or even immodest for public spaces back then.
Which today just sounds completely bizarre, especially for a park where you might be, playing sports or relaxing.
Totally. It's obsolete, unenforced. Fashion changed. Social norms changed. It's just a funny little reminder of how fast those standards shift and how laws based on them can seem pretty arbitrary later on.
New Hampshire has one that points to changing economics, right? The seaweed law.
Yes, the law against picking up seaweed off the beach.
Seaweed? Why would anyone care if you picked up seaweed?
Well, now we don't. But back then, like colonial times and even later, seaweed was actually a really valuable resource.
Valuable how?
Primarily as fertilizer.
Yeah.
Think about it. Coastal farming, maybe soil wasn't great. Seaweed was a key natural fertilizer. It was important for agriculture.
Huh. So the law wasn't about keeping beaches tidy, it was about preventing theft of a farm supply.
Exactly. It was designed to stop people from stealing what was considered a valuable local resource, crucial for the agricultural economy. It wasn't just beach gunk. It was an asset.
And now? Yeah, most people probably try not to step on it.
Precisely. So, rarely enforced today, obviously. Just a historical curiosity. But it shows perfectly how a law's original purpose can vanish as economic circumstances and the perceived value of resources change completely. It's a little echo of their agricultural past.
Okay, one more category maybe. Laws tackling serious issues, like really serious stuff, but with a weirdly specific angle.
Texas fits here, with the ban on the sale of human eyes.
Human eyes, just eyes. That sounds incredibly specific and kind of grim.
It does sound grim, and the sources explain it's part of the bigger picture regulating the sale of human organs and body parts in general. The goal is serious, preventing unethical practices, stopping black market trafficking in human tissue.
Okay, so it's within that organ trafficking framework. But why single out eyes? Is selling kidneys okay then?
No, definitely not. It's part of that broader ban. But the specificity of calling out human eyes is what makes the statute itself stand out as peculiar. The source material doesn't really explain why eyes got their own mention, which makes it particularly curious.
So it's still enforced as part of the general organ trade ban, but the eyes part is just legislative oddity.
Essentially, yes. It's enforced within the context of prohibiting illegal organ sales, but you don't hear about specific prosecutions for just selling eyes. It really highlights how legislation tackling complex, serious issues like organ donation and trafficking can sometimes end up with these strangely specific details, maybe due to how bills are drafted or amended over time.
Wow. Okay, so we've journeyed from fake mustaches and bathing donkeys to seaweed and human eyes. Looking back at all these peculiar laws, what's the big takeaway? Why are they even still around if they're so weird or outdated?
Well, taken together, they really are like these fascinating windows, aren't they? Into local history, culture, the specific worries and priorities of different communities at different times. They're not just random.
Right, they feel less like trivia and more like clues. Clues about what people cared about or what specific weird problem suddenly needed a law.
Exactly. And why do they stick around? The sources make a really practical point. Repealing old laws often just isn't a high priority for lawmakers.
If it's not causing problems, not being enforced, why bother?
Pretty much. There's no real political push or practical need to clean up the books, so they just sit there. But because they remain, they act as these cultural artifacts. Reminders of past concerns, specific events, old economic realities that shaped a place.
And they also show the lawmaking process itself, right? Sometimes reacting to real problems, sometimes maybe overreacting to fads, sometimes getting super specific, even if it looks absurd later.
Yes, absolutely. They show how the legal system tries to adapt and respond. Even the strangest ones often came from a genuine attempt to address something seen as a real issue at the time. Public safety, animal welfare, consumer protection, resource management.
So definitely more than just funny stories. Each one has a history, a reason, however odd it seems now.
They really do. They're a quirky, sometimes baffling, but genuinely insightful part of the American legal story.
This deep dive, it really hammers home that these bizarre statutes aren't just curiosities. They're like a living record, maybe a slightly strange living record of the hopes, the fears, the everyday concerns, and yeah, the eccentricities of the people and times that produce them.
They can definitely make you laugh, but they also offer real insights into how society works and changes. They spark a bit of wonder about the past.
And maybe a thought for the future, too.
Exactly. It prompts you to think, doesn't it?
If there
As our own society keeps changing, and we pass new laws for today's issues, technology, environment, social stuff, you have to wonder.
Which of our laws will seem totally bizarre 100 years from now?
Right. How might our current legal priorities, our specific rules, our attempts to regulate complex modern life look to future generations? What are we putting on the books today that will be tomorrow's weird historical footnote?